this should be information that underlines what we need to do to move this country forward. Well, hello, everybody. It's David Leis, and so glad you could join us today on November 13, 2025, the year of our Lord. And again, today we're going to have a very important discussion that I think should interest, frankly, all Canadians. And I think I'm very much looking forward to a heartfelt and thoughtful discussion about Remembrance Day and its significance. And no, this is not Remembrance Day. This is November the 13th. And you may be wondering, why am I wearing this poppy? Well, it's interesting. A lot of us have been taught that the poppy should be worn during the Remembrance Day period from the last Friday in October until November the 11th. But I did take the liberty of looking up the rules or suggestions of the protocol regarding wearing the poppy. And I looked that up on the Legion website, and it says that the Legion encourages the wearing of poppies at funerals of veterans and for any commemorative event such as a memorial service or the anniversary of the Battle of Vimy Ridge. As well, it is not inappropriate to wear a poppy during other times to commemorate fallen veterans, and it is an individual choice to do so. And I think that is very befitting, not only for today, but that we live in a free nation. And that's the whole point. We're talking about freedom in Canada today. And we want to explore this with an extraordinary panel that I'll introduce in a moment. As we reflect on what are the lessons learned from Remembrance Day, what does the service of those before us, a previous generation, what does that mean for us today? What are the lessons of history? And are those freedoms, frankly, being undermined? Are we doing our job? As the great poem from McCrae talks about in Flanders Fields, are we carrying the torch of freedom to the next generation? So that is a very ambitious question today, and I hope that you are able to join our discussion today. And I know that we have thousands of comments from you, the audience, from across Canada and beyond. So we're very grateful that you can join us. And so right off the top, I want to thank you for your comments, a great conversation full of wisdom that our government ignores at every turn. Thank you, gentlemen. And that is, of course, from Keith Rounds. Thank you very much, Keith, for your comment. Another comment, thank you, sir. My family had a long history of service of this great country, and I still remember friends and family who did not come home. And that is from Joe Higgins. And by the way, I think Joe was reacting to a special clip that we gave in commemoration of Remembrance Day. So thank you very much for those comments. And we're grateful that we continue to gain more subscribers to the program. At this point, we're well past 20,000 subscribers. So thank you very much for that kind of affirmation. And we encourage you to like and subscribe to the program. And we're grateful that you have a large following of parties that are care about this country and are trying to understand what's going on. Prairie 745 says, good afternoon, everyone. And so thank you very much for those comments. Another comment is interesting. Hello, all from Matthew. We have Nurse D. I'm very concerned for Canada. I think that's a comment that just came in. So those comments mean a lot to us and your questions. So I have a question right off the top. How did you commemorate and remember Remembrance Day? What does it mean to you? This is a very important question that I invite people to think about as we turn to our guests in a moment. So as the audience builds, I wanted to mention a number of very important appointments at the Frontier Center for Public Policy. And they are with, we're thrilled that two leaders could join us as senior fellows, and they include Bruce Pardy. He's certainly one of the leading legal voices in the country. He's on faculty at Queen's University, and he's affiliated with a number of other organizations. He's also the executive director of Rights Probe. And we're also delighted to welcome Scott McGregor. He's a veteran of the armed forces. He's had senior roles within the intelligence community, and he's you may recognize both Scott McGregor and Bruce as guests on Leaders on the Frontier. So we're very delighted to make that announcement today. In other news, I wanted to highlight that in this day in history, on November the 7th, just last week, there was something that happened in terms of the building of this country. It was referred to as the last spike, and it was driven into the ground, completing the Canadian Pacific Railway on November 7, 1885. Can you imagine building that today? And it's a really quite an accomplishment as it really put that ribbon of steel right across the country from coast to coast in different ways, and really made in part the country that we are today. So we want to commemorate that. In other news, I wanted to highlight that there's a immigration backlog, particularly in the file related to refugees. We have about a 4-year backlog. This was tabled terms of information at a standing committee. So that's a lot of people waiting to get into Canada. In the meantime, they are getting assistance, and certainly that's one of the traditions of Canada. But that's a major file that's affecting this country. I also wanted to mention as an aside that Malaysia's Petronas Corporation has inked a 20-year deal with the Cedar LNG project, and that's something worth noting. As I believe Mark Carney is in British Columbia right now, gearing up for announcements regarding yet more quote national projects. We also have other news on the immigration file. Is we have a motion by a Brampton Centre MP to offer amnesty to some 3 million immigrants that are in Canada. And the effort is to try to provide an amnesty to allow and remain as citizens in the country. What do you think about that? Is that a good idea or not? We also have another hike in the debt ceiling for this country. It was just increased last week, and it is allowing an increase in the borrowing limit of money as we rack up more deficits and debt. The borrowing limit will be increased by 20% to an unprecedented level of $2.54 trillion. In other news, we noticed that there was an announcement by Blacklock's reporter in terms of files showing the continued decline of the newspaper business. We know we need a good media in this country in terms of information, but it's a very tough environment. And we know that there's a decrease in revenues that fell from 2020. Operating revenues in the industry wide fell from 2.12 billion to 1.61 billion, or in other words, a 24% decrease. So that's very significant. On other news, we noticed that there's no sign of a foreign registry. The cabinet will not fix a deadline to enact a public registry for foreign agents through Parliament, passed the measure into law some 17 months ago. The Commons Public Safety Committee learned yesterday that the public safety minister is not going to go through with the process for a foreign ministry. So what do you think about that? And then finally, it's interesting that Blacklock's revealed in a internal staff emails, this came out through a Freedom of Information request, that managers were in the Department of Immigration advised to keep away from using language, and I believe this came out in the Epoch Times article, pardon me, that managers not reference free medical care in Canada. So I think that's a very interesting angle is how do we communicate what services are available in the country, because that just may attract a lot of people. It's really quite something. And then finally, I want to mention that there's an interesting job ad that has been taken out, and that has to do with an ad for a parliamentary, I believe it's a budget officer. The emphasis of the ad is on tact and discretion for this position. It's a very important permanent position that tries to give more accountability for spending in Ottawa. And here you have, I believe, the interim parliamentary budget officer, Jean-Jacques, as I recall. And he's the gentleman who cautioned that he was very concerned that the government had lost its, quote, fiscal anchors. So go figure. So today we turn now to the topic at hand, which is about remembering Remembrance Day. What are the lessons learned? We know that on November the 11th, we pause and remember all those who fought for queen and king and to defend the freedoms of their own and succeeding generations. We know that the stats are just almost overwhelming. And the stats are really quite significant here. In World War One, we had some 650,000 Canadians fight. 66,000 died, 170,000 were wounded. In World War II, 1.1 million Canadians fought, and some 45,000 died, and 55,000 were wounded. So there's all kinds of other theaters where Canada has served, including the Korean War, among others. And we also can't forget the home front in terms of the sacrifice that so many Canadians made to be able to bring together an Allied victory in those great wars. So this is really quite an incredible day today because we have two extraordinary guests joining us. The first one is Colonel David Redman, and David is an associate with Frontier. He has written many times about the importance of Remembrance Day. He served in the military in different theaters around the world, and he's also served this country also as a head of domestic terrorism. And a warm welcome to you, David.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
And then I'd also like to invite Dr. Gerry Bowler, and Gerry is a well-known commentator. He's an author. He's a historian, and Dr. Gerry Bowler is certainly a regular guest as well on Leaders. And so, a warm welcome to you, Gerry.
Howdy.
So, gentlemen, I want to start off with a basic question, and that is, what does Remembrance Day mean to you? David, do you want to go first?
I always find Remembrance Day extremely emotional. I think of those who did not come home, no matter what theater, no matter what era. My grandfather fought at Vimy Ridge. He was one of the lucky ones. He came home, but he died when he was 47 in 1947. You might find that interesting. He ran away from home at 14, was in the trenches by 1915, and watched many of his friends and family members slaughtered. All of my great uncles are buried at Vimy Ridge on the monument. Their names are cut in stone because they never found their bodies. My mother and my father both served in World War II. They were both in the RCIF. My mom was a WAF. My dad was an NCO pilot in the Pacific. So for me, it becomes very real that way. My uncles fought in Korea, and I, with my generation, served in the Cold War, peacekeeping, and all of the operations that followed just before and just after September 11th. And many of them didn't come home or came home in broken manners as well. So I remember family, I remember friends, I remember all of those I served with. And for me, it becomes extremely personal. And I find at times it's very hard during that day.
Thank you. Gerry, what does Remembrance Day mean to you?
Well, it evokes a lot of things, kind of a human reaction of pity for all those who suffered. Remember, there was a generation of women who could not marry after World War One because there was simply that many men lost. If you look at the statistics, Canada suffered incredibly. A 33% casualty rate, just astonishing. I'm also proud of what we have done, grateful for what we've done. And I think it's very interesting that at the end of World War One, the Empire and Commonwealth chose to call the day of commemoration a Remembrance Day, that this was not a moment of triumphalism, that we don't in Canada celebrate, our victories. We don't celebrate Batoche or Vimy Ridge or the Scheldt Estuary or Capion. We choose to remember. And out of that, if we remember, must come lessons such as gratitude, such as wondering what the values were that these people were dying for. And then the third thing is, of course, that of the cost that was paid. That there is a warning to be taken from Remembrance Day, as well as all the other meetings.
Well summarized, gentlemen. So as we look at Canada in 2025, um, have we forgotten the meaning of freedom? Is freedom dissolving before our eyes, or is that clear in our minds? I know that's a big question, but Gerry, how do you view freedom
Canadians
today?
have never been big on freedom. I mean, that's an American virtue that they will continually come up with. Canadians are much more complacent. We are the government that wasn't founded on life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We were founded on the principle of peace, order, and good government. There's that famous example of the American or the Canadian who wrote a book called Coping with Back Pain. And when it found an American publisher, it was called Vanquishing Back Pain. So freedom is not something, I think, that stirs the Canadian electorate because we've seen an erosion of our liberties, particularly after the introduction of a constitution in the 1980s that was supposed to enshrine them. So no, I think we are losing our liberties, and I don't see much Canadian response to it.
Interesting. David, your comment?
I can only agree. In the Charter, there's what are called fundamental freedoms, and there's 4 of them: freedom of conscience and religion, freedom of thought, belief, opinion, and expression, freedom of peaceful assembly, and freedom of association. Those are the 4 fundamental ones that were listed in the Charter. And I think in the last 5 years in particular, we've watched every one of those be smashed or taken away with absolute complacency by the Canadian public. And I watched during COVID, and I strongly fought what was being done during COVID. And Canadians just willingly allowed themselves to give up every one of those. And we see it not just within the Canadians, but within our paramilitary and military societies, where they believe that those aren't worth enforcing or those aren't worth following. So I'm very concerned for my grandchildren, who are now all grown. They're all older than 19 now and out in the world. And I know they take them seriously because we've had long discussions in our family as they grew up, and my 3 children and my 6 grandchildren. I'm worried for the future of our country. I'm worried for where those rights and freedoms will exist in the future unless we start to take them seriously, because there's many people that don't want us to have them.
Okay, there you have it. Where I'm talking with 2 incredible guests, Dr. Gerry Bowler, historian, and Colonel David Redman, about remembering Remembrance Day. And we just talked about freedom. What do you think? Is freedom being taken for granted in this country? And quite frankly, being undermined? Are we missing the vision, the passion that forebears before us had for freedom, rights, liberties, however you want to call it, those things that make citizenship and frankly life worthwhile? And I don't say that lightly, gentlemen, is that freedom is not free. We look through human history, through millennia. There's many societies where people were largely slaves or serfs, and people were not free. And therefore, the tradition that we have is, I think, unique. It goes back a long, long way to the UK and other related Western countries, where citizenship allowed us to be able to debate issues, to have freedom of speech, to be able to self-govern, to be able to live the lives that we chose to live. And so therefore, my question now today is, well, why did these people fight in these horrible battles where they paid such a significant price, the ultimate sacrifice? Why did they suffer? Why did they choose to fight? Is there an easy answer to that, Gerry? You're a historian. You've studied an awful lot of battles and stories of people that fought for their country. Is there an easy answer to that?
It isn't. It varies from war to war. If we look at World War I, a lot of the response came out of a sense of patriotism. that the empire was at war, therefore Canada was at war. Many of our citizens were considered themselves British subjects, and naturally responded to that. And the one emotional note that was sounded was that they were fighting not so much for freedom as for human decency. That the German Empire and the Austrian Empire, the Turkish Empire, our enemies, represented horrible things. These were the people that torpedoed passenger liners, used poison gas, bombed undefended cities, introduced bombing from the air, poison gas at Ypres, and so on. The Hun, the Beast, a battle for civilization, for decency against an iron. I remember a friend of mine did an article on the response of the University of Saskatchewan, which is my alma mater, in 1914. The university almost emptied out. Everybody signed up, professors, students, janitors, and they thought they were fighting what they called an iron tooth menace. So I'd have to say in World War I, it was because Canadians were decent people. And they didn't like what was happening in other parts of the world. The same was largely true for World War II. This was not our fight. Certainly Mackenzie King wasn't eager to get involved with it, particularly in supplying an army. He thought maybe, training pilots and doing Atlantic convoys was enough. He shamefully betrayed the military in the conscription crisis. But Canadians had learned, not thanks to the government, all through the 1930s, just exactly what kind of people they were facing in the form of the Japanese Empire and the Third Reich and Mussolini's Italy. So, again, I'd have to say we fought for our sense of what was right and what was decent.
Okay, very interesting summary there, Gerry. And I think a kind of a nuanced perspective is that it kind of makes sense that people fought for decency and this perception that somehow they were fighting against, well, an aggressor, an evil empire of sorts. And so that becomes really, a kind of a nuanced approach there. I appreciate that a lot. I'm talking about this topic about Remembrance Day, David, and I know that you've had an extensive service in the armed forces. Why did you decide to serve in the military?
Oh, I think it's really important to define why people fight into two little blocks. First is why do they join? And the second is why do they fight? And the why do they join comes from many, many reasons. For me, no one else in my family was interested in the military, both my parents being veterans. We were raised in a veterans home with veterans ideas, and it was a long handed down. And to me, it just seemed like the right thing to do. And I was excited by it. From the time I was 8 years old, I never wanted to be anything but an Army officer. And both my older brother and sister thought I was just insane. So each person chooses why they join, but it's always for a sense of purpose. And I think Gerry nailed it. The sense of purpose is different for each war, but it's also different in peacetime. Why do people join something like the Canadian Armed Forces? Once you've joined, once you're there, the most important thing is the person on your left and on your right. And it doesn't matter what color, creed, religion, no matter where they came from in Canada, no matter what their background is, poor, rich, indifferent, you're fighting because you trust them, they trust you, and you won't betray that trust. And so it morphs, right? And yeah, you'll talk sometimes about why you're still there and what you're doing and how crazy the command system is and how can the day get even worse than it is today. But you do it for the person on your left and right, and that trust that's built and that you won't let them down, and that great sense of integrity of doing what you say and meaning what you say. And so why people join, and I wrote the paper on the rebuilding the Canadian Forces and my rage at what's going on within the Canadian Armed Forces, but it all starts with purpose. And until Canadians see a real purpose defined clearly and eloquently for the Canadian Armed Forces, we will struggle with recruiting. And so until they see imminent danger in their own lives, most people just walk away.
Okay. What a great answer. I think you're onto something. I know you've written about this extensively, Colonel David Redman, about the importance of purpose for a nation. We all need purpose in our lives, our families, our communities, and so goes a nation as well. So in this case, it's fascinating. I can't help but respond or highlight, and I do not regrettably have this clip to share with you, but an extraordinary story came from the UK where I believe a 100-year-old veteran was asked on a TV program their thoughts about Remembrance Day. And he said, quite frankly, um, he doesn't believe that it was worth fighting for in retrospect. It was kind of a sad testimony, but it was also an honest one from a veteran who's saying how they feel that given the state of affairs in the country, and I think it goes back to your comment, David, about the need for purpose. We're losing, the danger is as we lose the purpose of our nation, then we lose the ability to, frankly, mobilize people who are willing to serve in this capacity. Is that what you're getting at?
I think it was in the white paper on national defense under the Chrétien era, and they said a country not worth saving is a country not worth fighting for. And it was one of the opening lines in that study. And of course, at the end of it, they concluded Canada was a country worth saving. I put it to you today that if you talk to peoples of the age group 18 to 25, you'll get a wide variety of answers of whether or not they believe Canada is a country to be ashamed of or one to be proud of. And until we can reinstill pride in our country, pride in our history, pride in the nation as a whole, and redefine the 6 national interests that define our country in a meaningful way with a 25-year vision of what we should and could be, Canada will continue to fracture. And if it does continue to fracture, there's many people waiting to gobble it up.
There you have it. So, Gerry, you are a historian. How do you look at this? I mean, I'm just amazed by Canada's military history in general. I look at the fact in World War II that Canada, among the Allies, even had its own beach. It was called Juno Beach when it came to D-Day. I mean, we have an extraordinary history, and yet history seems to be denigrated. Is that true?
It's quite true. But let's look at the flip side of the Canadian contribution to World War II. We had a superb volunteer army. Fought in Italy, fought through northwestern Europe, in the Pacific, Atlantic, Mediterranean. But the volunteers ran out, and that army was being ground to dust. Units were unable to function, and the government would not reinforce them from the vast army that stayed back in Canada, immune to overseas service. The zombies, we had 1 million zombies in Canada who were essentially conscripted, but promised they would not have to serve overseas. So they guarded bridges and ports and did useless stuff free from any real danger. Mm-hmm. The pressure grew on the government to finally send some of these overseas. But when they did, there were mutinies in the Canadian Army in which servicemen took up arms against their officers. Now, luckily it was quelled, but there was a limit to how much Canada was willing to pay in this war. And if 1 million zombies were unwilling to pay that price in 1944, threatened by Adolf Hitler, how many would volunteer to serve now in 2025 when the government has spent the last quarter century disuniting us, naming us really not that there's no we left, there's no common purpose left. The Constitution and the Liberal Party has chosen to fragment us as particular minorities. some privileged, some not. And
Wow.
how we get a common purpose out of that, I think anything short of a thermonuclear attack on Canada and a positive response that we saw in 1914 or 1939 or 1950.
Okay, so that's history that you probably may not have been aware of. We certainly have always heard about Prime Minister Mackenzie King's debates and machinations about to conscript or not. But that kind of reflects the real pragmatism that Canada tried to walk politically, is well, holding back on forcing people to serve. So I think that, Gerry, that's a great insight, and it begs the question: where are we today in terms of that passion and unity as a country to serve? Would anybody show up today if we called people to fight for our country? Is there perhaps a question that you may want to think about? We're getting a lot of comments from our audience today. I believe one of them is. My father was in the Navy. My uncle was in the Air Force. My uncle didn't make it out, and that's from SG from our audience. There's other comments when I mean, I think the other question that's related here is, what do we learn then from their example of people that served? What can we do to recognize, well, things such as their service to our country? What does it say about their virtues? And what can we learn as a model for today? David, is there an easy answer to that one?
Absolutely not. But for every individual that served, again, it was on their own terms. And each and every one of them was an individual, and they did it for whatever purpose they had. But until we build, there's 7 national interests to define a country. But the basic definition of a country is when a group of people who share common ethics and values band together in a geographic region which they're prepared to defend. So unity and national security are the first 2 of the 6 national interests that define a country. What we should have learned from our previous generations, starting in 1867 and going all the way through, was there was groups of people who had common sense and purpose, ethics and values, a common set of beliefs, and they banded together to ensure that a country called Canada came into existence and that they were prepared to defend its borders and to help others with international stability when our ethics and beliefs were challenged around the world. I think it's time we had that discussion with this generation of Canadians, and we start with unity and national security. And I want to go back to what Gerry said about unity. Unity, to me, the entire concept of multiculturalism that was brought in back in the 1960s and 70s was for one purpose and one purpose only. It was to destroy unity. It was to break us into smaller and smaller groups, pit us against each other, and fund people to turn them into hyphenated Canadians and give them money to stay hyphenated, when in fact Canada as a country was unified and therefore needed to be fractured. We need to have a complete review of our immigration policy and all of the other pieces that make up national unity. It's in the paper on Frontier Center, but that whole discussion about unity is how you define a country. What are the shared ethics and values that Canada believes in or now no longer does? And are we ready to be fractured into disparate provinces and territories, no longer unified as a country, and allow other countries, the great manifest destiny to our south, or even worse, China coming into our country? Canadians need to decide if we're going to be a country, and if we are, how to reestablish unity first and national security along with it.
All right. I think there's a lot of comments coming in saying, absolutely, I vote these great men for prime minister. Wow. Thank you very much for that feedback. But Gerry, what do you think? Is that really a key takeaway from today's discussions? We've got a lot of work to do to focus on unity and purpose in this country, because otherwise you don't have citizens.
I'm going to go to the Grey Cup on Friday. Just walk a few blocks to the stadium and watch my beloved Saskatchewan Roughriders lose to Montreal. Before that begins, we will have national apologies. We will have a land acknowledgement, which will insinuate that we're not really here legitimately. And secondly, there's creeping in apologies for slavery, an
For
institution
slavery,
that never existed in Canada.
just the opposite.
Yeah. Anyway, that's occurring at more and more public events. So it's going to be enormously difficult. We have a constitution that mitigates against it. We have the ruling Natural Party who triangulates, who lives off of this division. We have a complacent electorate who cares only about the comfort that they're having, not minding that they're kicking debt down the road for their kids and their grandchildren. We have
Right.
areas of the country that cannot pay their own way, and yet who love to keep milking the cash that flows out of Alberta. I'm sorry. Every time this comes up, I'm the unoptimistic one, and I don't have much optimism unless something happens unforeseen. And I look at our current leaders in Parliament. I don't see any of them able to rally a nation as opposed to struggle to win a plurality of votes in the high 30% range, which is all they need to govern.
Okay, so Gerry gave us a pretty powerful summation that it looks kind of grim in this country if we don't get our act together, if we always, well, do the typical apologies before a football game of all things. So how do we sing the national anthem from
Well,
the
we
top
sing
of our lungs?
words.
Pardon me, Gerry?
Well, we hire somebody to sing it, and then he will change the words of the anthem again to imply no legitimacy in Canada. Okay.
Yeah, no, isn't that outrageous? So I hope they never hire those singers again. How dare they change the words? And so we've got a lot of comments here. That comment just came in from, pardon me, that some of the names of people's the handles are a bit odd, but one of them is the acknowledgements need to stop, just causing division as planned. And it's certainly interesting. I know that for people that are paying attention, there was recently the Cowichan decision, I believe it was on August the 7th this year, that basically says it's a very precedent setting from the Supreme Court of BC, no less, that says that where Aboriginal title exists or can be claimed, then it is superior and prior to property rights fee simple. So this is surely a wake-up call as people learn more and more about this, as people can't get mortgages in that area of Richmond, BC. So this is a significant time for this country. Are we going to frankly grow up and be a nation? Does Remembrance Day mean anything to you? Because surely that was a marker of our contribution in previous generations, that we believed we were a nation, that we had purpose, that we were fighting for freedom, that we were standing up for against bad powers, and we wanted to be able to make a difference in this world. And meanwhile, we have many different analyses that have been tabled. I think of yours, Colonel David Redman, and so many others. And you came up with a very interesting article saying that Remembrance Day is being politicized. Can you tell us more about why you decided to write this article? What happened?
It was my fury at the Chief of the Defense Staff, who 1 week before Remembrance Day, and you know the timing was intentional and political. It had nothing to do with truth, where she apologized on behalf of all members of the Canadian Armed Forces, i.e. me, and all my peers and all those who followed me and all those who came before me, for systemic racism in the Canadian Armed Forces. Now, you know, her tears and her cry was all done to denigrate the members serving past, present, and future of the Canadian Armed Forces. I'd been through that before when Mr. Chrétien got the Chief of the Defense Staff, a guy named Mo Barry, to do an apology almost exactly the same, and the one before him after Somalia. The entire intent of when they do those types of things is to throw a complete lack of confidence in the Canadian Armed Forces. And so on one side, they claim they're going to pour billions of dollars into our national security and defense. And on the other side, they make sure no one wants to join it. And so we're in a position right now that we need a charismatic, confident leader who has a vision for Canada for 25 years. And that's why I wrote the paper that is on Frontier, Canada, a confident, resilient nation or a fearful, fractured country, and redefine a 25-year vision based on the 6 national interests that define a country that I was taught as an officer cadet in the Royal Military College back in the early 1970s, so that we can inspire the young Canadians. I'll tell you, my 6 grandchildren, out of them, there's a number of them that are ready to go. They are angry at what Canada is doing to itself and are ready to be part of a future of a confident, resilient Canada. They're looking for leadership because they don't have the experience or the background yet to do it themselves. So they're looking for someone in their 40s and 50s to stand up and say, do you want to be part of this conversation? And the answer would be a resounding yes. So for all those who say that the current generation isn't ready, I think they've had enough. They've watched their peers, they've watched what's been going on in our universities, and there's a group of them ready to say enough. And so that's why I wrote the paper, to give them the tools and the words, things like unity, national security, good governance, rights and freedoms, economic prosperity and growth, and societal well-being, so they can talk to their politicians and demand better. Because if we don't, Alberta will be gone in the wind to the United States. Quebec will be gone wherever it ends up going. The middle of Canada will fall to pieces without the funding coming from others. And manifest destiny, within 10 years, we'll see the United States, all of North America, own North America, because they can't allow China to own Canada. So Canadians, do you want to be Canadians or do you want to be Americans? It's your choice. And for the young, make your decision.
So there you have it. Is that the choice? Are we going to fold up this project called Canada and become, well, we'll all go to the wind, including the United States? I mean, this is the irony, is that you have President Donald Trump's tweets about becoming the 51st state, and that certainly has offended many Canadians. But it still begs the question, how are we going to be a strong, confident nation that's sovereign, and we're going to do it in the Canadian way? So, Gerry, is Colonel David Redman, do you think he's being a little bit histrionic, a little bit dramatic here?
Not in the least. I think he's being very realistic. I applaud his hopefulness. I have 3 daughters. 2 of them have moved to the United States. I now have American grandchildren. One of those American grandchildren loves the Canadian Armed Forces. His Halloween costume was a 1980s RCAF uniform that he bought at an Army surplus store. But I worry. I'm going to a Grey Cup game. This may be the last Grey Cup game played under Canadian rules. The big brains behind the CFL are Americanizing the game with a set of rule changes that are insupportable. Look at what's happening to junior hockey. The lure now of American colleges will ruin junior hockey across the country. Our best young players will go to American universities where they can make fortunes playing even before they turn professional. I think it's quite likely that we have more NFL fans in the country than we do have CFL fans. Our popular culture is overwhelmingly American. The number of Canadian shows, movies that we watch is infinitesimally small. Canadian culture is shrinking. It's kept alive on government support. Our media cannot support itself. If the government withdrew its funding, I don't think there's a single newspaper that would continue to exist. We're on very, very shaky ground, and I can see all of us bending the knee to Washington before too long.
All right, so there you go. We've got some pretty clear-eyed perspectives on the challenges that our nation faces, and maybe there's opportunity. So let's hear your perspectives. It's interesting. Kenzie Kraken says, I was horrified to see the Canadian Armed Forces leader cry on national television while apologizing for systemic racism. We are a nation of spoiled children. And it's really remarkable, that theme of apologizing. And it seems to me that this is a very important theme to recognize, is there's a deliberate set of actors that, pardon me, a set of actors that are deliberately, in my perspective, trying to denigrate our nation, trying to basically edit, block, change our history, be able to. They're constantly making cartoons out of our history in an effort to portray it as racist and uncaring and just endlessly degrading it. And I think this does great harm to our nation. And I think the question then becomes, where the heck is our political leadership class? They would stand idly by and basically sacrifice our pride and identity for the sake of, is it just cynical politics, or are they buying into this kind of crazy ideology? What's going on, David Redman, from your perspective? And then I'm going to turn back to Gerry, of course.
So with the political class, it's all become more important to become the government than to represent the Canadians that you're elected to represent. And so when an MP willingly says to a microphone, well, you know, I have a lot of Islamic people in my riding, so Canadian ethics and values don't matter. I have to represent their ethics and values. When you have a prime minister who stands at a microphone and says Muslim values are Canadian values, it shows he's never once in his last decade and a bit outside of Canada thought about what Canadian values are. It's time that we have a politician, and I wrote about it in the paper, and I have done countless presentations on what are Canadian ethics and values. After I listened to Mr. Trudeau say we were a country with no culture, no ethics, no values, and no definable culture, that's what made me sit down and write Canada 2024, where I define in detail what are the Canadian values up to 1967 and the erosion thereof. And so until we have politicians who will bluntly and clearly state what they stand for in terms of those values and the history of our country, then we will have people who willingly do the throwaways to grab votes on the margins and get themselves reelected. And so the political class has to decide if they want to be members of a Canadian parliament or members of the dissolution of Canada.
Well said. Gerry, your comment?
Well, we've had 15 years of a government by a very charismatic leader who kept insisting that we were a genocidal hellhole, making it very difficult to say to countries like Iran, we don't like your policies. And the Iranians just turn around and say, you're a genocidal hellhole. When Parliament was given the opportunity to say that the Indian residential school system was a genocide, every Conservative voted yes. I don't see anyone in the current Parliament who is willing to stand up for the kind of Canada that Colonel Redmond and I owe allegiance to.
Right on. So there's hard stops here. Like, let's be real. If you want to have a country, you got to know your purpose, and you've got to stand up and say, we're not going to compromise on truth. And this whole misdirection and claiming that Canada is a genocidal nation is poppycock, to put it politely. So this is where we've got to come together, and we've got to talk about solutions. So I want to talk about kind of an ironic play here. And I know that our colleague, Lieutenant General Michelle Maisonneuve, has talked about this extensively. Maybe it's about time, as we rebuild our military, that we actually have mandatory service in the military, assuming that that service is grounded in the basics, and we talk about national purpose. Would that be a way, Colonel Redmond, to kind of renew our country? Let's get this country moving again, not just economically, but it's culturally as well. I think both of you gentlemen have really underlined well the importance that if you're going to play the game and you're going to build a nation that's going to be competitive, it's not just the economics, it's the culture. And this is what so many people in this country don't seem to understand. It's the culture, it's the day-to-day traditions, the behaviors about how we treat each other. And we teach that from kindergarten to universities. And if somebody can't get on that program, then we're not going to fund you. So is there a case for mandatory youth service in the armed forces, Colonel David Redman?
No, I won't be any more clear than that. No. If you believe in national service, that's different. I can have a conversation about that. National service in the Canadian military? No. As an officer who lived through Pierre Elliott Trudeau, when I joined the Army, my first platoon was 85 soldiers. I was a brand new lieutenant, and I had 85 soldiers. I had one master warrant officer, 5 warrant officers, 1 sergeant, 1 master corporal, and all the rest were privates. You have no idea what it is like to teach privates with no corporals, with no master corporals. I do not want people who do not want to be in the armed forces of Canada defending my country. So no, national service based on the armed forces is not, in my opinion, the way to go. You'll have a whole bunch of people who don't want to be there. In fact, you'll probably have 80% who don't want to be there. National service in a different form. But before you do that, let's go back in the paper, Societal Wellbeing. One of the pieces I break apart and talk about completely is the education system, starting with kindergarten and going right through, and reinserting a pride in our heritage and culture for kindergarten through to grade 12 into the education system again. It should be a compulsory course in every grade talking about Canada, Canada's institutions, Canada's ethics and values, Canada's way of life, and comparing it to all the other nations of the world to prove very clearly through positive reinforcement that Canada is not a genocidal hellhole when you compare us to Iran or name a country in the world. You don't have to pick bad ones. We're different than the United States. We're different than Great Britain. We're different than everyone else because of our history. And I wrote about it extensively. So my point is, if the question is, should people be forced to join the Canadian military as a way of unifying country? No, it's never worked, not just in Canada, and it wouldn't work in Canada. In fact, it would probably work far less in Canada. But national service of another form, as you grow, when I was stationed in Germany throughout the Cold War, 1970s, 1980s, and 1990s when it ended, the Germans had national service. And you either chose to go in support of the country or in support of the military. Something like that made sense so that you didn't force people into an institution they wanted nothing to do with.
I think you're right. Mandatory service is a challenging principle. On the other hand, as we build or rebuild the armed forces, and hopefully that will happen, maybe there's an opportunity to keep moving our culture forward. But the whole idea of national service is a good one.
If Canadians see a purpose, we had mass recruiting happened in 2001. Okay? They had more recruits than they knew what to do with in 2001, 2002, 2003. And then as they saw the purpose dwindle, so did the recruiting.
Okay. Gerry, what do you think? What are some of the solutions to get our country back on track? Is it to reintroduce history and good history in our school?
It would be lovely, except that it's a provincial responsibility for education. I know the kind of committee that sets the curricula. It would be enormously difficult. You can see what's happened in Alberta, where they've tried to institute a new curriculum. There are powerful entrenched forces against it. But absolutely, well, what's the point of having a national broadcaster whose purpose is to undermine national unity? You can't turn on a CBC morning show without hearing from some discontented activist bringing the country down.
The victim Olympics, right?
Exactly. I mean, what do Canadians do best? Apologize. I mean, sorry. It would be a difficult fight. Colonel Redmond is absolutely true about the need for history, the need for pride. But it's going to have to start at the bottom. I put no trust in politicians. It's got to be culture. It's got to come out of charter schools, homeschooling parents,
Mhm.
churches, community groups. Get immigrant groups interested in Canadianness instead of paying them to preserve their imported culture. Change a lot of things.
Right
And
on.
yeah.
There's some great comments here. SG says, my school played the national anthem and God Save the Queen. And I will tell you, with my children, I did notice that their school took Remembrance Day very seriously. It was really quite impressive. So there's some really good pockets of great schools that do get Remembrance Day, in my opinion. But on the other hand, let's go further when it comes to education. If you look ironically at the recent strike in Alberta, surely that should underline to that government that the money needs to empower parents. The money should go to them, put it through charter schools. They've got amazing charter schools in Alberta, and they're a leader in that regard. But go further, give the vouchers to parents, and follow the Swedish model where people can choose which school is best for who is it again? Oh, yeah, their kids. So imagine that. Wouldn't that be a breakthrough? So we can empower citizens to live their lives. And I think that will help renew our country. So there's a lot of solutions here. And I guess one of them that I'd like to pursue is the whole question, though, of when it comes to your ideas, is there an opportunity to frankly take how do we get the immigration file back on track here? I mean, it seems like we've been welcoming a flood of record number of immigrants. We all know that we need immigrants. That's a given. But the numbers are truly stratospheric, and that is having huge impacts in our countries. How do we get the immigration file back on track? Any thoughts on that, Colonel David Redman?
So let me challenge your premise. Your premise is we really need immigrants. So we've just had huge discussions in the last 2 years how AI is going to replace all our jobs and how there's going to be a dwindling employment environment. But let me back up and answer your first question, which is how do we manage the immigration file? The first thing we have to do is change a government, because this government loves mass immigration. And I don't care which iteration of it you talk about. Immigration has been one of their fundamental, and I mean mass immigration, not controlled immigration. So how do we do it? With the change of government, we put at least a 1 year, and I use the word at least because I got called out in another session I did on exactly this topic, at least a 1 year moratorium, no immigration for 1 year, while we put together a task force to review immigration policy for the next 25 years for our country. We have to review what are the fundamental principles of immigration, what will be the different types, and I mean all forms of immigration. I mean foreign university students, I mean all of it. The small business, large business, agricultural, all of it. A 1 year moratorium at a minimum. Sit down with a very serious cross-government, cross-private sector, cross-NGO, cross-everything group to review what will be Canada's policy going forward, with zero for a whole year, and then a gradual reinstatement of whatever that policy defines. Because without that cataclysmic stop, drop, remove the illegals now that are here now, and redefine what our country really needs based on the 6 national interests, then we can define a way forward. But you have to do it based on all 6 national interests, unity being number 1 at the start, but economic prosperity and growth certainly being part of the discussion.
Okay, so let's pause immigration. Let's do some healing here and reset the compass in terms of where we want to go. What do you say, Gerry?
I think it's absolutely essential to do it because what you are getting on the fringes now, more and more visible on the internet, is not just an anti-immigration mood, but an anti-immigrant mood, which does our country no good. People are talking about forced expulsion of Canadian citizens based on race. Racial tropes are emerging, just as they are on the right wing in the United States. If we want to avoid that, we've got to have a reasonable discussion.
Right
But
on.
people are afraid of it.
Yeah, we need a national discussion, and let's get it grounded. I think this is that's a great insight, Jerry, is that we are really fracturing again this country, and we've got to get these issues right. So this has been a far-reaching conversation, gentlemen, and certainly with our audience, and I'm very appreciative of it. And so I just want to wind things up in here and say, what can citizens do as we look to renewing and building this country? We know that our country's experiencing a lot of challenges, both economic, socially, culturally. What can citizens do here? Colonel David Redman?
They have to demand better of their elected officials, whether they're municipal, provincial, territorial, or federal. If they don't, the elected officials will know that there's no consequence. They can do whatever they want without consequence. And so unless citizens become involved and demand more by writing, phoning, showing up on the constituent offices, showing up on the steps of the legislatures and the city halls, going to town halls, going to provincial meetings, sitting in the gallery and demanding more, nothing will change.
Right on. Your silence suggests consent, and you're part of the problem.
It's got to go farther than that. People have got to join political parties and get involved. It's tedious. It's expensive. But you can't complain unless you have a stake in the game. And it can start locally, but it has to be done.
All right. Well said, gentlemen. And I want to thank you both for this incisive conversation about lessons learned from Remembrance Day and the state of, frankly, freedom in our country and what we need to do to get things back on track when it comes to this situation. So thank you very much, our Colonel David Redman and Dr. Gerry Bowler.
Thank you.
Well, today we've had a far-reaching conversation. I want to thank our audience, and I just encourage you to think about our role as citizens. Years ago, people chose to take citizenship seriously, the purpose of our nation, and they served, and many paid the ultimate price. And let's do well to remember the poem in Flanders Fields. And I want to highlight that one of the powerful paragraphs in that poem is, "Take up our quarrel with the foe. To you from failing hands we throw the torch. Be yours to hold it high." And therefore the question today is, will we hold that torch up high on behalf of those that gave the ultimate sacrifice? Only you can answer that question. So that brings to an end our discussion today. So I wish you the best to you and your family this week, and we'll see you the same time and same place next Thursday.
Here at Frontier, we don't receive any government funding. We are nonpartisan and we work for you. Find out more and support this important work by visiting fcpp.org today.